All right. So I read this book back like in January. I don't know how I discovered it, but I thought this book was fantastic. I really, really, really enjoyed it. What y'all
It
think
really hangs together well.
Yeah.
It's got that arc that editors are just so insane for.
Well, how do you describe that arc?
Well, there sure are a lot of pigs.
And blood.
There's a pig arc.
Okay.
And when people are identifying with animals, pigs are not usually high on the list. She chose a different pig.
Mhm.
Also, the word split.
Blood, bone, and chili oil, I wrote down. And then the three generations, the grandmother, the mother, the daughter. Actually, 4 generations, I guess. Her grandmother, her mother, herself, her daughter. Oops.
I spent a lot of quality time on Wikipedia looking up 1951 in Korea.
Did you?
God bless Wikipedia.
Wow.
And what'd you learn?
Well, Japanese occupation, Chinese invasion. That was my grandfather's war. I didn't even watch MASH. I'm out of the Korea loop.
Yeah, my grandfather was in the Korean War, and that's the one thing, he wanted to make sure when I went to DC, when that monument came out, he was like, please make sure you go see that for me. So.
Yeah.
Y'all's grandfather was in the Korean War. Y'all are babies. My father was in World War II. Your grandfather was in the Korean War.
My grandfathers were in
54.
World War II as well. Yeah.
Well, he was in that one too, but I'm 54. I'm doing the best I can.
So let's talk about the cover then. I really like this cover. The artist, I did a little research on, Jihyun Lee, South Korean artist. She does a lot of installation art that is really cool. It's surreal, and a lot of it uses Korean landscape. Right, let me admit somebody. And this is actually an installation piece that I guess they took a photo of and created it for the book cover.
Oh, that's neat.
And these are plants, like native Korean plants. Made out of
Totally
paper.
thought they were fans.
I did too.
Oh, they're made out of paper. They are.
I thought they were the things that you put cupcakes in or little candies in.
They do look like that.
Mm-hmm.
I tried to determine which plant it was, but I wasn't successful in that. And then, the person, the figure back in the background,
Mm-hmm.
turning away.
Yeah, with her back to the viewer.
Anyway, I thought that was a really well done cover. It seemed to fit the book quite well.
It is really beautiful. Is she turning away from Korean culture? Is she turning away from plants? If she's turning away from plants, are they food plants? Is her identity kind of wobbly in the face of all the weight of culture on her? How do you read that cover?
Or is she facing her life in America and Korea is behind her, but still influential because it's so colorful and real and vibrant? I don't know, many ways of looking at that.
I like that she worked through several generations
Yeah.
in her poems. And the cover sort of felt as though it felt like a threshold. And it also, with the poems, felt as though she was moving back and forth on that threshold. I don't know if anybody else felt that way about it.
It's a pretty gutsy move to use first person for your mother and grandmother. I mean,
I know.
I wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole.
You know, and with that cover image, you know, with all the books we've done, I mean, they all have distinct covers, and you know, it's hard to pick a favorite. Well, I wouldn't want to necessarily, but there's something really. I love the colors of this, the multi colors. You know, there's just a vibrancy to the greens and the blues and all those types of things, which is what I notice immediately about it. I mean, that's what pulls me in, and I don't think I noticed for a little while the image of the woman turned away.
Hmm.
I somehow missed that in my first encounters with the cover. And you know, I haven't had the book as long as Sandy has, since January, but I've had it for quite a while. And but then I just sort of almost fell in love with it's like, oh, there's something mysterious about this turned away woman. Her back is to the reader. There, yeah, some level of mystery about that, which I found myself drawn to, and then tried to think about how that might be through the poems themselves. So anyway,
It's interesting too that there's a corner. It's like the vegetation is pressing her into a corner, or I guess it's the opposite of backing into a corner. It's forwarding into a corner. And it's almost as if she might be overtaken by the flora.
Hmm.
well, it could be hungry, and
Two things I noticed about it were that there's some, hello? Oh. Something I noticed about it was that the red, I mean, I was like, Jeff, I thought, oh, the color is just beautiful. And then I read it and I thought, I
Yeah.
wonder if that red is symbolizing blood.
Blood.
And
Yeah.
that, and then also, I don't know, maybe it's just my fanciful imagination, but where she's I can't do this backwards.
Yes.
These look like people, like washed out images of people to me. And so I don't know if those are like the ghosts that she's facing in this piece.
Oh, wow.
Wow, I love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
But it's probably just light and shadow for the artist. I don't know, but that's what I picked up after I read it. I was looking at it again.
How interesting. Yes. Yeah.
And I didn't take it as a corner. I took it as a threshold. And whether she's going toward ghost or toward something that she doesn't quite understand, those did look like cloud people shapes,
Yeah.
something amorphous that
Yeah.
that she, as a very well-defined person, actually can't see that clearly, but is moving toward.
Maybe so.
It's beautiful cover.
Mhm.
That looks a little bit like a trap to me. I just feel like there's a corner. That's a dead end, you know? I mean, I'm glad you think of it as a threshold, Alice, but it just, to me, it looks like, you know, it looks like time out. You know, go
Ah,
corner.
I just kept reading this, and there was a book, DMZ Colony, that got the award that I thought Diaz should have gotten in the first place. Oh,
yeah.
but I kept contrasting what she's doing to that. And I thought DNC Colony was kind of polemic and was taking sort of what she assumed were parental attitudes and what seemed to be a lot of personal anger. But it felt like something, it didn't feel like she'd lived through it. And on this Summer Always Hungry, whether she's taking her own voice or her grandmother's or her mother's, I believe in that voice. I can't explain it exactly, but this felt very real to me. It felt authentic.
Yeah, I agree. I felt like she was almost reliving stories that she'd been told, through her growing up years and sharing true family history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'll admit, I was confused at first because I saw who she was, and then I was reading and I'm thinking, wait a minute. And so
Yeah.
it took me a little while to realize that she was speaking through different people,
Mhm.
and it was all the I, and I thought, oh, okay. So I had to wrap my head around that. Because sometimes she doesn't, like my grandmother thinks of love while steeping tea. So sometimes she's not speaking in the I. So
So
sometimes,
covers.
yeah,
Why are all these young poets so beautiful?
I know, right?
What is with these people?
Asian hair.
I'm sure that helps, but it's not just her. It's like every young poetry book I run across. These stunners are on the back cover. And I'm like, geez, where did I go wrong?
No.
That front cover, the colors, it makes it so pretty. And I really, at least 2 cheers for a pretty cover. I think it really helps the book sell.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
the cover looks pretty,
Mhm.
even if there's a corner in it
Or a threshold.
or a threshold.
But in reality, though, it is a corner, because if it's a piece of installation art, then it's, room size, and that is the corner of the room. That'd be cool to see in real life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Show that again, Sandy. Hold that up again.
What, this?
Oh, yeah, yeah. The full- Okay, I thought you had the bigger.
No, sorry. No. That's just the book. All right.
Well, what do we want to say about the poems themselves?
The daughter transmorphic on page 22, 23. Oh, I thought that was kind of an anchor for what she's doing in the book, where she's saying somewhere the idea of me pricks her finger on the thorn of strange flowers clipped from her girlhood. What the sap waters grows to a city. I've always wanted to populate myself. Mama, if lore has taught me anything, I know queendoms, like language, can't last long childless. Why must all tired stories start with the exit of the mother? A matrilineage expunged and covered in moths, mouthing what's left. Flip the page, gone is the matriarch. Close the book, and blood seeps between chapters. Now, men with bayonets. Tomorrow, dogs. In no version are they not hunting us.
Mm.
And to
Oh,
me,
thanks for reading that, Alice. That's really good.
it felt as though it caught a lot of experiences through 3 generations, but it also moves everything to a kind of mythic level, to a kind of Jungian fairy tale that goes regardless of whether you're in Korea or Germany or Afghanistan.
Yeah.
For me, that was the core poem.
Interesting.
And
Yeah,
I
it,
kept
it
pick-
is full.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Oh, I was just gonna say it's full of great lines too. Statements. Close the book and blood seeps between chapters. I mean, that's just such a depth filled line where it's 3 lines there, but or even the question, why must all tired stories start with an exit of the mother? I've always wanted to populate myself. I mean, these are really fantastic lines. But it all begins kind of like what you're saying there, Alice, with somewhere the idea of me. I'd almost like that to be a line by itself. Somewhere the idea of me. I probably would have broken the line there, but she didn't.
Well, I think there's also this reoccurrence of, grandmother, mother, daughter, and kind of this protection or this, I don't know, bond between the women in the family as they are experiencing traumas, female traumas. And it's interesting that this poem, Alice, that you brought up, it reminded me immediately of the very last thing in the acknowledgements, where she says, and finally, for my mother, the greatest hero of my life, everything I know of love and of beauty I learned from you. Mama, your only daughter will be fine. Please live in pursuit of your own happiness now. That little message to her mother.
Yeah. I found it interesting that through the poems, the vegetables, the spices of the Korean culture, that was interesting to me because it really brought me closer to the poems, to what she was trying to say, because I connect a lot with food. And so I really enjoyed that. And I mean, her simile and metaphor that she uses throughout the poems, it's just incredible, in my opinion. She talks about a fat apple moon. I have never heard that. Then she was explaining when the planes dropped their eggs, hatched a red so loud the landscape was struck, briefly mute. That is just beautiful. Or that was on page 12. And then she talks to the son, in this life, I will be your daughter and you will teach me how to run. That's on page 15. And, sentences like that just, I thought were incredible. And she had 2 poems called Immigration, which touched me because I immigrated. So not in the same way, not in the severe way that she describes, but I could really connect to that when she says, you cinched your tongue on America until no tongue was rightfully yours. It's when your languages kind of flow together. And some days you know this language better than the other language. And she also talked about the TH, which is a problem for many people. And let's see, I have it here somewhere. The tongue tip press of the TH refuses her. Some people just cannot overcome that. And I hope I have in some way. But all of these things connected me really well to the book. I thought she's an incredible writer and well deserves our attention.
That was the one, I can't remember which poem it is, Helga.
Page 47. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
the other immigration poem.
Where the
the-
teacher's given her a different name
Yeah,
Yeah,
that the teacher can pronounce, but she can't.
14.
yeah, that's page 40,
47.
47.
47 and 14 are both called immigration, but the one on page 47, I thought was really
Yeah.
caught me in memory, and how they, were changing your
Mhm.
name and all those things.
Yeah, that the fourth line in that poem. At 16, she's still new to this nation that unnames her daily.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember stopping with that line. It's like, oh, it's
Yeah.
a really fun line.
Yeah.
And then the ending, the way that the poem ends with, I wouldn't know how to say this, right? I mean, it's symbols,
Yeah, be proud of what they
but
tried.
yeah, be proud of what they try to efface.
I think that was her Korean name. That's my guess of what.
That's
the-
what I thought.
Yeah, Sanju for Kathy.
Dunju.
Yeah, yeah.
Helga, when you were talking about the food, there's I know there's a poem called Recipe, and there's another one, War Soup, and fish head.
Exactly, there are several recipes.
Yeah, fish head soup, the repetition.
Yeah,
of
war
those,
soup, fish head
those-
soup, and recipe. Yeah,
And bone soup.
but there was another.
bone soup.
Oh,
Yeah.
on page 48, benediction as disdained cuisine. I thought that was well, I don't think it'd be my anchor poem for the book, but it's definitely one
Yeah.
that this poet should read at readings. Like, hey, read that poem. It's a great one to read.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I love the ending of that poem on page 50. Give me my heritage back. Let me suck meat off the shell of every animal you won't eat. Give me refuse, and I'll make it worthy. I love that ending.
I think we've got a pun there on refuse and refuse, and it is just so,
Oh, enter, yeah.
that's a pretty kick-ass pun. And our friend the pig makes an appearance in this poem.
Yeah.
Give me pig skin dipped in powdered grain.
Mhm.
Yeah. And actually in the poem, The Leaving Season on page 59,
Yes.
the pig is speaking, and that is interesting.
Keep bumping the mute key. That was my anchor
Oh.
poem. I thought that was the one where it all really braided together really beautifully.
The Leaving Season was?
Yeah, where they find the pig's head on the beach and someone made it an offering to survive in the fishing boats, and she becomes the pig. Yeah.
So who is the I in this poem? Is it the grandmother, the mother, or the poet?
I thought it was the poet here. Well, let's see. Yeah, because we've got that no good boyfriend who crops up in a number of the poems. I let him fuck me, regret, then let it happen again. I hated how he smoked in bed, hated the weakness he assumed I inherited from my sex. I think that's the poet. The one who's so glad to bleed in the minstrel poem.
I thought that regret was what had fucked her. I mean, the way she wrote, I let him fuck me, regret, then let it happen again.
Mm.
And then she just personified the regret. But maybe not.
Well, regret is very talkative if it is.
Yeah.
He explains to her about harvesting the oysters and what keeps me so afraid of wounding a man.
That's true.
Yeah. Hmm.
A lot of husking and unhusking. I mean, it really holds together well because she, not only does she have the ties between the women, but in the cooking, but she uses a lot of the same language in the different poems. Like someone mentioned split and spilt and just the scallion and the chili oil. The language, she unifies the book with it, but it doesn't seem repetitive. It just makes it kind of hooked together. It's like a chain linking up the poems when you can find the same language in other poems.
Yeah, I mean the way she loves the food, but she's kind of creeped out by, by the live crabs, the live pig, the pig bones,
Yeah.
this were pig in the leaving season.
Yeah. Her poems to me seem very earthy.
That's a good word for it.
Yeah. I'm a poet.
I really liked a lot of the language in the poem Obeyed, which is on page 30. I love your walls awash with blues, your wide windows open to crushes of milkweed, sage, morning glories, bittersweet as your tongue unhusked. And then in the last stanza, outside the night swelled and lulled, livid with cicadas. I wish I had a cicada poem. I wish I'd made my cicadas livid instead of raucous and relentless. Livid is a good word.
Yeah. It's probably born out of that repetition of those L sounds.
Mm-hmm.
Later there's swath and summer, and the sounds are really good. Pushing, pungent, pith, and this poem's full of alliteration.
Yes, and it always amazes me when people are bilingual or when I would assume she learned Korean first because her mother would be speaking it, but when they write so deftly in the second language, that always really impresses me.
In the poem Blood Type, I just loved the ending there where under B, she says, when I feel him rising against my thigh, I know he is a man of God. He only comes to claim the rib I've borrowed. I think that's just a beautiful way of talking about that.
That kind of takes us back to Diptych of Animal and Womb, which has that god-awful Reddit quote at the beginning. These wombs belong to us, not the idiot creatures they are attached to. And now the rib is also the man's, the womb is the man's, everything is the man's.
I liked, just to go back to the blood type for a moment, you know, the structuring of that poem with A and AB and
Yeah.
B, and then ending the way that she does with O, the ways we treat the body. I was already kind of wondering how she was, you know, what she was going to do. And then when I got to that part, I thought, yeah, that's great. It's a great way to end the poem.
Yeah, yeah.
I kept thinking A, universal recipient, O, universal donor.
Mm. That's, you know, Alice, that's interesting to think about. At least, I don't know, of course, you know, when you read these books, you know, we're as I always say, we're not a graduate workshop, but you know, there's a part of you that, you know, oh, if I had some more time, I could really like think about it and come up with some, but the way in which immigration is a kind of new infusion of blood, the way an immigrant is both the recipient and the donor. And then I'm connecting it to what I thought was one of the, I don't know if it's my anchor. I like that we use this term anchor poem, you know, but on page 38, the poem, The Tale of Johnwa and Hungry. I don't know how to say this, but that was one that I did Google, right? I looked this up because I thought, well, I know this is probably something that would be important to know, but did anybody else look that up? It's a folk tale, Korean folk tale, and it's kind of fascinating to think about it in terms of what it might mean to the book. Possibly, I don't know that this is what she had in mind, but I think in the folktale, you know, the mother dies, and then the father eventually remarries, but then that, of course, that stepmother, if I remember correctly, frames the daughter. Okay, so gets the son to do something with a rat, and they put that in the bed, and it's as though she's bled, and so she's not, you know, a virgin, I guess. And so that's to sully her name, and the father believes. So if you think about that as kind of like, you know, which is the mother, which is the mother country, which is the stepmother country, which one, you know, it if that larger kind of metaphor is at work, and like I said, I don't know that that's what she's intending, but you know, would America be the stepmother, so to speak? And I just I thought about that as I was reading through and thinking about some other things. I kept going back to that poem and wondering, but even this this other poem with A, B, and B and O blood types, all the different blood types.
Interesting.
Or y'all can just tell me that's just, oh, you're right. You're farther out in left field than normal.
No, but
I see a lot of violence against women in these poems.
Yeah.
yeah,
That is not so, I mean, maybe the language is nice, but it's not what I would call, you know, like beautiful. It's shocking and
Yeah.
and hard to read.
Yeah, it's like in that very,
Blood type is one of those for me.
yeah. In the very first poem on page 2, where she says, it's always the girls for everything. When was the last time you've heard of rooster soup? We put the bodies to boil in salt and broth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the ending of that poem too is great.
Yes, it's great.
a good poem to begin a book with. Um, although, one of the thoughts I had, and I'd love for y'all to like push back on this, but there was a part of me that thought the beginning poems weren't as strong as some of the poems that came later in the book. And arranging of a book is always a mystery as we've all kind of dealt with ourselves. But I always tend to read books and think, well, what's the real best poem? And sometimes I agree, like, oh, the one they began the book with, that'd be my choice too, or I get an idea of what I think it's setting in motion. And I do love this opening poem. I think it's a great poem to begin the book with. But there are other poems in the book that, as some of us have already talked about, that are poems that really kind of cinch everything for us. And a poem like Savaging, which is on page 55, that to me was that seemed like a major poem to me for the book.
Oh, yeah.
I can't push back on that, Jeff, because I had the same feeling, but I guess I thought it was more because I was confused about who was speaking at the beginning. And I just thought it was me, but I have a lot more lines underlined and portions starred and everything in the later poems myself. There are some really good lines in the early poems, but looking through, I've noticed most of my underlinings and highlights are in the last half of the book.
When you're opening up, and you've got this kind of major imbrication of themes, maybe you feel like you've got to explain it before you lose people. And that's something I'm struggling with in the current book, actually, is, if you don't tell them, is anybody going to see it? And then you can kind of expand on it and dig it down as you go deeper along.
Yeah, I guess I always think that, like, the first poem, there's no way to read the second poem except through the lens of the first poem. And then the third poem is read through the lens of the first two poems, And I always like to just take that for what it is when I encounter it in a book, and so in this particular book, I do think that opening poem is a great one, but I guess it has to be, right? I mean, like the first title, all female. I mean, there is no other. That's so. Even the title is just perfect for this book. And even though, like, take the first line, at the night markets, women. Just as a unit of attention, it's already rich. It's just so rich right away. And then that next part, peddle their prices. And that's both, okay, it seems very literal to what's happening, but in the context of the fullness of the book, there is, complications and about value and worth of women, and, the ways in which, someone might change themselves for someone else or be changed by someone else. And that idea of peddling is all of a sudden, it's got a lot of implications in the book. So things like that is I love thinking about.
We have to remember too, that title of this book, Some Are Always Hungry. Okay, so the first poems are food heavy.
Right.
So it's like setting off from the title, and washing through the pages, with this hunger, and the hunger builds through the book and becomes more body-based, belonging, immigration, new home. What does all that mean? Culture losing, culture gaining. So I liked how it started because it was a easing into heavier subjects, I think.
Yeah, it sort of builds in intensity, although the first poem is pretty intense.
Yeah.
Yeah. But even like the second poem, My Grandmother Thinks of Love While Steeping Tea, and all this, you know, this sound quality in this poem with the repetition of P and the E and the O and the ah and the and then towards the end, I mean for you to taste your inheritance,
Yeah.
the gunpowder, our soil. I mean, that is
Yeah, it's really good.
powerful.
It's really good.
Turning on that, you know, from tea.
Yeah.
that's what they
Well,
talk
but
about.
yeah, that word steeping is so good.
Yes.
And then later drink it all.
Yeah.
And I
And
really
it's
love.
love. She's thinking of love.
And I love the ginger sharp and sweet will permeate our palms ravines. I thought that was.
There are also a lot of poems in this book, many poems. Yeah, but that first poem, so you've got your culture, but it's mostly about the female body being ravaged. And the second one, it's about the inheritance, the gunpowder, the soil, the war. And the third one is about women turning into animals. And then there's bone soup, and that's probably the first appearance of the pig, and about the hunger for fat. You know, the food is so many things, and some of it is just
Yeah,
not one of those books where food is always wonderful.
Right. Yeah.
but it's also interesting in several poems, they are bartering for food, or like in Bone Soup, they're making an exchange for 2 chunks of calf leg bones. I find that interesting. And I think there are other instances in the poems
Because
where
in wartime, starvation.
exactly
And
you do what you have to do in order to survive.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
she's really good at that, about how awful what you have to do is. I mean, it's very low key in Bone Soup, but by the time you get to savaging, it's savage.
Well, again, I think she's using a lot of folklore. Oh, the saga of the nymph and the woodcutter. Only she's really, I think, enlarging it to all women and all woodcutters, all mortal men. Oh, and
Well,
what
I'm glad you,
happens to them at the end is, you know, they're caught serving, but they can't ever go back to the place from which they came.
okay.
And-
I'm glad you brought up this particular poem, because this poem, I have a big question mark across it. Will somebody please walk me through this poem? Because I didn't understand it at all.
Which poem are we talking about?
On
The
page
one on page
25.
25, the saga of the nymph and the woodcutter.
Yeah. I took it as coming from a saga, a folk tale. And we're starting with douse the black lacquered body of the earthenware pot with rice vinegar, antiseptic, and scrub, which is what you would do. Tonight, the girls squat, taunt on their haunches, peel open prone heads of cabbage, salting between each leaf and on it. As they stack the heads 10 high, so they can release their waters, untender and unmow themselves, that's like you're making kimchi. Oh, they recall their bodies as they were at the first descent, lips serrated, cutting grooves on their gums, brilliant and capable before the men came to claim them, stole their celestial robes so they couldn't fly home. In a way, it reminded me of the Swan Lake, you know. Clipped wing of the seraphim, they say, baby, you can't be mad forever. So they've done this thing so that the women can't fly away. Oh, say stay, say stay. On its blue shelf of night, the moon is a dunce. It doesn't wonder why its daughters don't return. It's because the men have taken their robes away. They can't go back. It kills every animal that gazes too long on its light, but not the men. The girls were made wives, then mothers, bellies swelled like winter melons split too soon from a vine. They didn't want this life. They wanted, but then it breaks off. And you can think they wanted something different. You can think they wanted their past life, but it breaks off, so you don't really know. And back again to the task at hand, the Jim Jang that must be finished before the day's end. Now bid the oysters yawn around the shucking blade. Now pack the brine heads with chili and jayat. The hangari is hungry. Now set the boiled pork on gilded plates before the men who laugh at the TV, frozen and golden, absorbing light like fat gods on an altar. And it's as if these women, now having been captured, become servants to the men. They're no longer of the status of daughters of the moon. They can't ever go back to that. And they're always in servitude to the men.
And it's like, I agree with you, Alice. It's kind of a retelling of a mythical story. What I'm reading into this is, so in a time of war, how do you get out of your situation? You marry a soldier and you go back to their country.
Yes.
And that is what I think her mother did.
Mm-hmm.
And how the family got to America. And it's not the life that they planned on or necessarily wanted. They were desperate to be rescued, to get out of that situation. They didn't want this life. They wanted the promise of freedom and good life and whatever, but they came to America and it's not that. It's you don't get your name anymore. You don't get your culture anymore. You don't get your food anymore. You have to assimilate.
Okay, so I guess I did get the poem. I guess what I didn't get was the leap from the title to the poem.
There is a traditional story like that. It's very much like the story of the seal women, the Selkies, where the husband steals the clothes, the woman has to stay on Earth. Although in the original, eventually she finds the dress, the robes, and she goes back again. And in this one, it seems like not so much.
Well, I guess, I mean, with plural girls and men, and then we've got one nymph and one woodcutter, and I was like,
yeah,
I wasn't making the translation between all the girls being a representative of a nymph and all the men being representative of a woodcutter, I guess. Because as you're walking through it, I'm like, okay, so yeah, I got it. Where's the nymph and the woodcutter reference? So
I think that M dash with nothing behind it is really potent. It makes me think they don't even remember what they wanted, or they've tamped it down to be able to survive, but they didn't want this life they wanted. Well, what? They don't even remember. Doesn't matter. It's of no use. I thought that was really powerful.
Powerful, it is. And I love the line right before that, the belly swelled like winter melon split too soon from a vine. That's
Mhm.
gorgeous. The language is gorgeous.
Yep.
Yeah.
So the book is called Some Are Always Hungry. And one of the poems I really liked was called Thirst on page 53. I like the little indented parts. This is how we heal. A blue, to a blue, the hue of thirst. Even this can be inherited. Man is ship, woman is harbor. Mother, I too envy any selfish thing. Every one of those indented lines really spoke to me in this poem.
You know, since we're on that page, and I already had my finger there because I was looking at the poem that precedes that one called Praise, thinking about it in terms of what we're talking about with the other poem, the previous poem. That's the one. This is the poem where the mother is drying the money, stringing up money like egg fattened fish drying on a laundry line. A patron had thrown them in the oil slicked sink water. Here's a tip for the little assistant. I don't understand what a mother is, what toothin' thing lives inside. Toothin' is such a fascinating word in that moment. Very, very unexpected, but also fierce. Is that what that means? What toothin' thing lives inside for her to take my hand, smile proudly, say, daughter, this is the richest we have been. Think about poems like that one and some of the others where it's sort of like there's give and there's take and there's accept and reject, and all these things are colliding within the voices.
So I guess the mother is someone who will do whatever, who has learned that basically there are no limits. She will eat the bone soup. She will eat the war soup. She will marry the soldier. She will wash that money.
Yeah.
Well, I kept thinking of the grandmother too. There's one point in one of the recipes where the grandmother's using Japanese, and in several of the poems, she talks about how the soldiers would react, the Japanese soldiers, if someone lapsed into Korean.
Right.
I kept thinking about the Japanese and the comfort women. Oh, she doesn't come out and say that happened to her grandmother, but there's one poem about bringing a girl child down from the mountain and painting her lips cherry red.
Yeah.
And it reminded me of a lot of those atrocities. And I don't think her mother or her grandmother necessarily passed things down to her directly. Oh, but I think that she knows enough of her family's history to feel it. Oh, there's something that happened to them.
No, in the Alice, in those poems like War Soup and Recipe.
Yeah.
I think it's really fascinating. I was trying to remember what it was in War Soup. I'm not seeing that one, but in a Recipe, you've got, say number one, this is on page 27. Splay the hen on the cutting board's yellow face. Number two, for sauce, garlic. Number three, peel the ninjin, Grandma says in Japanese. And then, later you get things like number seven. During occupation, this tongue was dangerous. We've been doing a bunch of ingredients here, and now
Yeah.
all of a sudden there's something that doesn't seem like it fits the poem, but then you realize it's also part of the ingredient. It's part of this.
Yeah.
I thought that was a really fascinating choice, and there's something like that in the other poem too, I thought.
War Soup has the same thing
Yeah, well,
on page 20.
that's on page 2021.
Yeah, it's the
Which
ingredient,
number is it?
number 3.
Oh.
Number
Long
3.
vegetables
Oh,
Before this, life-giving flesh, singed wire hair, fat ripples its on horizon. Number 4, dear family I left behind in the northern province of my birth.
Yeah.
You live as I feed and am fed.
Have they
yeah,
given you to
then we're back to
say?
then we're
I
we're at
missed that.
Spain with number 5. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's really interesting how that works.
Yeah, it becomes part of the. I mean, the ingredients are much larger than the tangible, touchable food items, for instance, that might be put in this.
Yeah,
It includes other things.
yeah. Well, recipes are
very-
heritage, right? Heritage. And part of the heritage
Oh, yeah.
is this
Yeah.
tragedy and travesty and suffering.
Well, and their food to live in the body. Yeah. I mean, it's all together. She's got it all in there. It's really pretty
It's
amazing.
It's also memory. I think all of us probably has a special memory of food associated with, especially an older relative, and that is a tie.
Mhm.
But she manages to get in homonyms. That one's
yeah.
the one that I thought actually showed how she's doing both sides of things at both at the same time, because it's the same word.
Or 3.
It's on
Three.
page 16. Yeah. But the same word means to carry, to give a ride, to pick up, which is nurturing and supportive. To burn or singe by fire, which is destructive and painful. And it's the same word.
Yeah. I love
Yeah, I like that.
this is
Yeah, I
it's
thought
fun.
that was a clever poem. Very, and the way, especially toward the end, I burned you gently in my arms, burned you all the way home, away from laughter, burned you against my breast to safety. All those different ways that the word burned might mean. I guess it means all of them at the same time. Mm.
But there's also love there, it's like destructive, yes, but it's like I'm doing these things so you will survive. And daughter, you will not forget these aches you learned. If you have a daughter, you will burn her too. Because that's how
Family.
family goes on.
But
Yeah.
notice the well, it looks like the third definition, but it's B, lettered B. And I don't know if Korean works like Chinese, but in Chinese, that word spelled like that can mean 4 different things, and it's the way you say it, whether you give a lift at the end or a down at the end or a lift at the beginning. And so you got to be careful, because if you don't make the lift at the right place, instead of saying dog, you might be saying, witch or something instead. So I wonder when I see that, if that's not I don't know how the Korean language works, but that makes me think of how the Chinese language works. And I just wonder if you say it one way, it means to burn. And if you say it another way, it means to carry, to pick up. And then it makes the ending not all negative, because if you have a daughter, you will burn her too. You will also, carry her, you will pick her up, you will be there.
Every one that I read that had burned, I read it with both meanings. Where she's saying, I burned you, I thought, I picked you up. You grew up, given a ride, bundled on my back. It's just, you got to ride on the coattails of our immigration. Carried your tongue on America until no tongue was rightfully yours. So it's both. Have you ever taught children who had Korean mothers? They're very strict.
Oh, well, yeah.
And very, very much in your face. What do you think you're doing? But very caring too.
Their love is shown in a different way.
Yeah.
I guess. I mean, I've seen Chinese mothers, and that's the way they are too. And that's, I know they love their children, but it's a push, 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 push.
Yep.
Can we talk about form? There are 2 poems where she has slashes for line breaks, or instead of line breaks, and in another one, double slashes, as if for paragraphs. And I wondered why she might have done that. I think the poems are on page 29 and 35.
Oh, yeah.
I guess, Helga, you're kind of wondering why? Yeah, I'm not exactly sure, but I think there is something kind of freeing. Well, one thing I'm thinking of here is, say, some of W.S. Merwin's poems. If you're familiar with W.S. Merwin, and maybe in a book like The Vixen, for instance, there's no punctuation, and you might go so far into a line where that thought ends, but then the next one begins, but there's no dividing line, there's no period, there's nothing. But after a while, you really do hear it. And, so you don't really get tripped up like, why didn't he put a period in here or whatever? And if you've ever tried to write that way, and I have, there are some poems of mine I've written that were kind of influenced by that. I just wrote them without punctuation. I'm a nerd. I'm a grammar nerd. So eventually I went back and put all the stuff in. But writing them without those restrictions, there's no, you just you sound like an idiot, or I do sound like an idiot trying to explain how freeing somehow that was and what it made me think of the next thought when I wasn't really, writing with the rigidity of the normal sentence structure or this, and that, I don't know, maybe there's something like that that's going on in these poems. Because if I just take out the forward slashes, I think I'd still know where each thought ended, the next one began.
Yeah.
And maybe that's just the experimentation. I don't know. I mean, sometimes I'm trying to figure out when I read somebody's work why they, why it's. Well, she has more prose poem type frames in this book as well. Why that as opposed to some of the other things that were done? And she's got some that look like they're kind of been exploded on the page. Think about it. Is it the husband stitch poem and some others that caught look like this on the page?
Yeah.
So I don't know. There might have been a time when I was like, you stick to, get some shape to your poems and stick to it. And there's a benefit in that, but there's also a benefit in just an experimental mind that's trying different ways to hear the language. And maybe for what was happening in this book with language, the different kinds of languages, they take on different shapes.
Okay.
And she plays with
Thank you.
space. She plays with space a lot on the line.
Yeah,
Maybe
she
those
does. Yeah.
flashes are a silence, pause. But one thing that I thought was really interesting was on page 7.
Yeah.
There is a line towards the middle of the poem. Safety is not far. Stand up. And there's this big amount of space
Yeah.
in between those phrases. And stand up's on the next line. I mean,
This one was one of my,
she's saying something there in that huge amount of space. There is a lot of impact.
yeah,
I
this
thought
was one of my favorite poems. I love the "What's spilled is a river we must follow," and it's spilling like it is the river. Yeah, like even after the safety is not far, and then there's that space, and then stand up. Also after see, there's a big space. The bright lamps of our whole bodies. It's like you have to have that space to make the leap from what was just said to that next thing.
Yeah.
And even going backwards, call it sanctuary, call us lotus, we bloom and rot, rise bog-bodied into tomorrow.
Yeah, the experience of reading a poem, it can be such a bizarre thing, right? I mean, it's the words all say what they say, but I guess what we're talking about is form and content. So sometimes the form of something is not just a block text, and it's something else, almost like the page is a canvas, and the experience of that, of encountering the words in a particular kind of pace, perhaps, is still part of the experience, I think, of reading a poem. It's the experience is not just simply the meaning, but
Yeah.
but the oral flavor of saying the words, and the experience of encountering at a certain kind of pace, perhaps the words. And we've all heard people read who, you know, who maybe sometimes read really fast, or they read very slow, or they do have a caesura somehow within the middle of saying something that you can't really explain, but you know that was perfect. You know, that was necessary for that kind of delay of expectation, and then the word or the phrase that follows. So I don't, yeah, it's a mysterious thing what happens with
Yeah.
just
Also on
reading a poem.
page 10, the quotation marks.
Mm.
Which I thought was interesting. I wasn't exactly sure how to interpret that. Other than there's some unsaid something, or you
Yeah,
know, something that was
after
meant
the
to be said
embrace.
that wasn't said,
Something you can't say.
something you can't say.
Yeah, I mean, read that after, or experience that after. Your voice carrying clear over the threshold. Sister, welcome home. Before you turn to embrace me. And then those quotation marks. What would have happened if the quotation marks had been spread out, you know, from each other, creating a sense of distance there, perhaps.
This is an interesting poem too.
Mhm.
I think this is a rape poem. And then the unspoken would be even more powerful, for the fear to speak or what you cannot speak.
Mm.
So one last poem that I really liked was Reversal on page
Yeah.
5.
What page?
She's like 65,
65.
which ends with a direct address to the reader, dear reader. But this is the unmaking of all of the Some Are Always Hungry. I just thought that was just really nice. I mean, really well done.
I thought it was going to be the last poem, and then it wasn't.
I did too. I did too. I was a little bit like, oh man, there's no more.
Yeah, me too. I had the same thought.
And they unslaughter the pig.
Yeah.
Yeah. I liked de-Korean, the broth.
Yeah.
That was interesting. Unharvest.
Yeah. Seek the sow and unslaughter her. But if you find the pig dismembered and cannot bear it, grant yourself permission to not tend to her rememberment. Remember,
Uh-huh.
her daughter,
Yeah.
meaning
Yeah.
spend. That is just, I just love that. Instead, let her tend to herself.
And then the pig addresses the reader.
Yeah, I so want to survive this.
Yeah.
Which is also all of these Korean women's voice.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the poet, it's the sacrifice.
The
Yeah.
grandmother, it's the mother, it's everybody.
They so want to survive. Can they be remembered by remembering? It's really
So great.
it's pretty epic.
That gives me chills.
Yeah.
Yeah. The I was struck in the very last poem by one of the last statements, but I love the phrasing of forgiven to whole and rejoice, for there are no burning cities waiting to inherit them. But that idea of like forgiven to whole is such an unusual phrasing, but it's a kind of stepping out of the previous poem. I mean, hopefully forgiveness can make one whole, but remember,
Yeah.
dismember, there's a wholeness that comes. I don't know. It's fairly, there are times when you read and like the language is so, it's
Run.
such an odd turn of phrase that you're just really kind of stopped by it. And that was it's not the only place, but it's a great way toward the very end for the book to end also. I know y'all were talking about the previous poem kind of felt like an ending. But I don't know. I kind of like the grandmother praying at the end. I like that idea as a way to end the book too.
Yeah.
Do we think she's right though? I mean, bless the ones still tethered to earth who grapple with their own disappearing. Let them soon reunite with viscera and bone, forgiven to whole and rejoice, for there are no burning cities waiting to inherit them. I mean, aren't there? America's not rife with burning cities.
Yeah.
I mean, do we believe her or is she fooling herself?
I don't know. I want to make sure I know what you mean, Catherine. I want to make sure.
So the grandmother's praying for blessings, bless the day, bless the family, so determined not to waste, bless the weevils, all the things that kind of ruin food, but you eat them anyway. Bless the hen, bless the food, bless the daughter, and bless my daughter and her oscillating moods, her moments of tenderness that set my teeth aching. Bless my granddaughter, who I guess is the poet, though she's forsaken you. And I guess the you is the gods or the ancestors. Forgive the body. This naked mollusk thing, I know what it can do. Slit and puncture wound, I've seen a red sky escape through. Okay, is that what the body can do? I'm not sure. Blue knife of mourning, we've got the rape. No, I do not resent you. I'm not sure who we don't resent, but it seems like she's talking about the descendants, the mother and the daughter, who were her daughter and granddaughter, with bless the ones still tethered to earth who grapple with their own disappear. Unless maybe she's looking back at the ancestors herself, who grapple with their own disappearing, let them soon reunite with viscera and bone. Maybe that's resurrection. But if it didn't make sense to say, there are no burning cities waiting to inherit them if she's talking about her child and grandchild. But if she's looking back at the dead, maybe it does.
Yeah, maybe she's talking about the war, Korean wartime.
The ones still tethered to earth who grapple with their own disappearing. So
they're still in.
We're not sure who she's talking about. We have a mystery.
I'm thinking it's relatives still in Korea. The war is no longer.
I think they must be dead because otherwise, how could they reunite with viscera and bone?
Claiming their true heritage, their being the people that they're meant to be. They're not, having to give up their name or their language. They are in, I don't know, I'm just blah, blah, blah.
Well, it makes me think of back to the rememberment, forgiven to whole, remembered, put back together. Like they talk about in the previous poem. I liked what grabbed me was the second sentence, bless his home and its four corners, the rice in our bowls, though it is infested.
Interesting.
I mean, they
Well,
say
I
it's
mean,
better to end with ambiguity than with certainty, so maybe that's better than ending on the prior poem, but
And too bad we don't have the poet here that could answer that.
there's a poet.
question. Apparently she's in Korea.
Ah,
well, there was other, there were poems where the idea of inheritance as a word was used. And so this inherit at the end,
Mhm.
echoing back.
That's what I say. I said before that I think she does so well. She unites the poems with language from other poems, not just language, but distinctive language, you know. Especially, I mean, it seems to me the blue knife of mourning is in here a lot. A lot of the poems have the blue knife.
Yeah, blue knife, yeah.
Well, I mean, it's a book that it is what we want in a book, right? Which is to reward rereading.
Yes.
And it seems to get richer the more time we could talk about it or spend reading it. So kudos. As I love to say, I just love poetry. I just love reading books.
Okay, do we want to, anybody else have anything to say on this one? It's almost 8:30.
I liked it a lot.
Yes.
Thank you
I did too.
very much for finding it.
All right, do you have next month's book handy, Jeff?
Is that Carolyn Porche's? Is that next month? Yeah.
I'm not letting this-
It's really good too. That
Yeah.
happened to me last month. I accidentally read that book for some reason. So then I couldn't come to, I couldn't come in.
Oh.
I read the right
Oh, you
book.
could come. Yeah. You can always mooch off of us. It's okay.
Thank you.
So that will be
But yeah.
then the 19th for Carolyn Porche.
Yeah, I've had this book for, I don't know, 7 or 8, 10 months. I forget when it came out. I got it pretty much just as soon as it came out. It's got a lot of really fantastic poems in it. So
Good. All right.
Thank y'all once again.
Loved it.
You're
Right.
welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
hang in, y'all.
Okay.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.